Well, today I am pleased to welcome back to the FCPA blog, Kristy Grant-Hart, CEO of Spark Compliance Consulting. Welcome back to the FCPA blog, Kristy.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's great to be here.
I think it was about 2 years ago when we last visited together here in New York, and we were talking about the ISO-37001 standard, which I think at that point was just in draft.
It was brand new. I think we were within a month of its publication date, which was August, I believe, 17, 2016.
Well, so how time flies.
Indeed, like that.
So since then, there's been a lot of information out there about the standard from consultants, practitioners, and providers. And Kristy, I'd say some of it's been complimentary, but some of it's been contradictory. So how about we bring our readers up to speed and we talk about some of these issues?
Absolutely.
Okay, so first, let's rewind a little bit. The ISO 37001 standard, what does it do? And more importantly, or just as important, Kristy, what doesn't it do?
Okay. Well, the ISO 37001 standard is a global ISO standard. So the International Standards Organization has been around since the 40s. It was created by the UN, and it creates standards so that things can be standardized across countries.
Okay.
So that if you buy one nail or a screw in one country, it's the same size in another.
Okay.
So
makes sense.
The ISO standard for anti-bribery was developed over 3 years. From 2013 to 2016, and 56 countries participated. So the important thing to know is that the standard was created to meet the expectations of the regulators, of business, and of best practices across the whole world, which is why it's so exciting. It basically encapsulates all the best practices that we have and says, this is what is expected, and you can certify to that it's happened.
Okay, so who can certify for the ISO standard? And is that different than, let's say, a company that might be hired to help a multinational prepare to get certified? So what are the different practices when it comes to getting certified and getting prepared to be certified?
Sure. Well, there's really three bodies involved.
Okay.
So you have your consulting company that helps you get ready, understands the standard. Any smart company will do a readiness assessment first to figure out where they are, what's the gaps, fill those gaps, and then go get basically audited. Okay. The auditing process is where the auditors decide whether or not you have met all of the obligations of the standard in order to be certified. And your auditors work for a certification body.
Okay.
So that certification body has qualified auditors according to a different ISO standard. They have to be bribery experts according to the standard.
Okay.
And then you get certification from the accrediting body.
So the certifying body, that's the body that actually issues the certification.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, my understanding is that any entity can say they can do that and issue that certification. Now, that seems really scary because theoretically, you could have an entity that doesn't have any anti-bribery or compliance experience issuing a certification. So my question is there any governing body that issues some sort of certification that this particular company has a background that is relevant? And if so, is there like a listing where a multinational could find out who's got that background?
Yeah, it's so exciting. It has taken 2 years to get to this point.
Okay.
So what happens is the ISO standard came out, and at the same time it came out, there was another standard that said, look, if you're going to be an accredited, that's the most important word, certification company, we have to watch you over a couple of years do these audits, look at your auditors, review their work to make sure that you're living up to the standard as it's supposed to be. So there are national bodies.
Okay.
Every country that participates in ISO has a national body that it's accrediting. Okay. So in the United Kingdom where I live, it's called UCAS. In the United States, it's called ANAB.
Okay.
And what happens is they go and watch the certification bodies perform their audits, and they get accredited. And this has taken 2 years, which has been a major struggle. So huge companies that have publicly stated that they're going to seek ISO certification, like Walmart, like Microsoft, have been waiting for that accreditation so they can say, we want an accrediting body that has got their accreditation. So there are, the UK pilot is almost finished.
Okay.
We know that they're publicly stated that there are at least 3 companies that we expect to be accredited by the end of the summer. ANAB has given, the US has given out 3 different accreditations now. In Dubai, a company called CRI Group has gotten it. Ethic Intelligence out of France is now on the cusp of both the US and the French accreditation. So what we're seeing now is finally a critical mass of companies that can say, yes, we have lived up to this. Our national body, which represents the whole world, by the way.
Is that an accreditation body?
Yes,
Is that
an
what it's
accrediting
called?
body
Okay.
has given us accreditation, right? We are now an accredited certifying body.
Got
And
it.
that's what you want. You want to look for that. And if you are going to accept someone's ISO certificate as being proof that they have a good program, not exclusively, you still need to do due diligence on them, but to know that that matters, you really need to look at who gave them their accreditation.
Okay. So we've got, in sort of the hierarchy of this, we have an accrediting body.
Yep.
Where
Which is the
that's
national level.
And they're going to certify companies that basically voluntarily submit themselves to get certified.
Yes. And it's an expensive and time-consuming process. So you really have
sure.
to be committed to doing this work in order to get through it.
So will there be a listing? Like, do these national accreditation bodies have a listing where they'll say, these are the companies that we've certified?
Usually, yes.
Okay.
That's up to the national body how they do that. But certainly if you were to Google ISO-37001 accreditation in whatever country, you could find those bodies very easily.
Okay. So you talked about sort of the 3 poles of this, right? The certification, the audit, and the getting prepared for it.
Correct, yeah.
I'm assuming that there has to be some division of responsibilities that one company can't do all of
No,
these.
it is absolutely, it's a conflict of interest, first of all, and it's
Okay.
against the standard. You cannot have a consulting body also be on the auditing side. And usually most bodies that do certification don't ever dabble on this side.
On the consulting side.
No.
And the auditing is really just a subcontract of the consulting side,
Yes.
correct?
No, the auditors work for the certification body.
They do.
Yeah. Yeah, and in my company, in Spark Compliance, we've gone through the course and been auditors under
Okay.
Ethic Intelligence for companies. So we know what it's like to be on the other side, but we
Got
would
it.
never work for a client on both sides. That's impossible.
And what about the auditors? What sort of program do they have to go through?
The one that we took is 5 days. 5
Okay.
full days. So you learn the standard, you get the practice, you do mock audits, you have to send your work to their people who look and see whether or not it's good enough.
Okay.
And you can be a sub auditor and then a lead auditor after you've done several. The most important thing to understand is that you have to meet the 17021-9
Okay.
standard, which says you need to be an expert in anti-bribery in order to be someone who does these audits.
On the audit side.
Yep.
And what standard is that again?
17021-1 and -9.
Okay. And is there an accrediting body on that as well?
That's part of the ISO 37001 body that created
Got
the
it.
standard.
Okay,
Yeah.
terrific. So let's talk about what this means. Now, like yourself, I attend a lot of these and speak at these anti-bribery and compliance conferences. And some of the international ones, so I'm not just speaking about the Department of Justice here. When I hear prosecutors speak and they're asked about ISO, which they often are, I seem to detect that they're approaching these questions with a little bit of cynicism and reluctance, but their replies are all quite similar, Kristy, in that they're saying, look, we'll always look at what a company's doing, whether there's an issue that they discovered or self-reported, but it's not ISO that determines how we're going to look at it, it's the law,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So do you think that there's maybe some misinformation or like a misdirection out there about how having ISO can help you to avoid, shield, or reduce the possible consequences of a prosecutorial action, whether it's self-reported or discovered?
Here's the thing. No prosecutor should ever allow a standard or a certification to stand in the way of a prosecution.
Okay.
Nor should a company ever decide that since they have the certification that they have no risk and they don't need to continue to be vigilant and do their
Okay.
due diligence. What the reason that it has mitigating capacity is because to get your certification, you've got to have all your ducks in the row,
Okay.
right? You've got your training program, it's risk-based, you have records for it. You've got your risk assessment, it's risk-based, you have records to show that you've done it. You have reporting to the board, it's required. You have the C-suite's attention. You have all these things that a best practices program would have. So if you're going for mitigation, with most prosecutors, you have to do it before your issue shows up. You've got your
Right.
ISO certification and you have an issue, okay, your program is documented and it meets best practices. And that's where the mitigation comes from.
So, Kristy, I think that maybe is the misdirection,
Yeah.
right? Is that it's not so much that you're going to hold a certificate in front of a national
Yep.
prosecutorial authority. It's the practices that you have to do to get there.
That's right. And
Those are the
maintain.
mitigating.
And maintain.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not the certificate, it's
That's
all
right.
the parts of it.
It's the framework and the knowledge that you have met those best practices, because you can't get your certification unless you do.
Okay. I mean, that's really good to know. That's very helpful. So for a company that already has a robust anti-bribery compliance program, why would they need an ISO certification? And again, there's been some skepticism out there that are they doing it more for PR, maybe to show to their board or other stakeholders, as opposed to really deepening their anti-bribery compliance program?
I just don't see it as an either or.
Okay.
First of all, I don't think that there's any reason to believe that if you get your certificate, you're suddenly going to stop, right?
Right.
Or that the ISO standard itself in sections 9 and 10 requires continuous improvement and auditing of your own program to make it better.
Okay.
So that's part of it. But the second thing is, because you want to show people, it's all well and good for me to say my program is amazing, my program is so good, but how are you proving that to your stakeholders? How are you showing your board? You got the compliance officer in there for 15 minutes saying, my program's fantastic. Well, prove it. Let me see. Help me to know. Because the board probably isn't this deep into anti-bribery.
Right.
Their financials, all the rest of the things they're considering. You want to show that you've met best practices and that you're also not just in your own head about it. Because I was a chief compliance officer, and you don't always know what all the expectations are. So having someone come in who's an expert on the outside and said, you know what, you got it. Or honestly, this isn't quite good enough. Let's figure out how to make it as good as it can be. And then you can get this certificate, put it on your wall. It doesn't change the need for your program to be good and continue. It shows people you really did it.
Right. But do you think that there's a chance that this can lead to sort of least common denominator thinking? That a company can say, look, we've got our certification, we're doing everything that's required, but why go beyond that?
If you get into the weeds of the ISO certification
Okay.
process, it's hard. It's hard to get there. It requires things that make my heart sing. Like, you have to have adequate resources, and you have to prove to your certification person that you have adequate resources, human resources, monetary resources, that you've got the right controls in place, that you have financial and non-financial controls, and you've got whistleblower hotline things that work, and gifts and hospitality. If that's a lowest common denominator program, wow.
That's a good
We're
program.
in a much better place than we would be otherwise, right?
Well, again, that's really helpful because I think so much of the discussion has just been around the certificate and not what's required to get there.
Yeah, it's harder than it looks. People who say it's a paper program stuff, they've absolutely never been through the audit process because it's brutal.
Is there a way that someone could look at just sort of an executive summary of what some of the practices are under the ISO
Yeah,
certification?
absolutely. We on my website, we have a checklist that gives the high-level requirements because
Sure.
the thing's like 100 pages long.
Right.
It's hard to read.
Not for everyday reading.
Truthfully, it's hard to read. And that's one of its detractions, right? It's hard to read.
Right.
But once you get into the weeds on it, it covers what you'd expect, right? So we have a checklist that you can take a look at. And I promise you, if you've got a decent program, you're going to say, you know what, we've got most of this in place. And once you get into the nuance, you'll find those little gaps that we can fix.
Well, Kristy, thank you for your time. I mean, you've really tackled some what I call uncomfortable issues here, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Okay.